Okay, good. Okay, good. Good. I'm always glad when there are fellow dog people on the Zoom call, because that's just the reality of the Zoom life lately. So yes, Carol, thank you for inviting me. I am Amy Jones. I'm the CEO of the Dallas Area Rape Crisis Center, as Carol said. We're an organization that has been around for 10 years. This 2020 is actually our 10th anniversary. And we serve not just Dallas County, but primarily Dallas County. And I'm going to throw up a couple of slides just so you all can kind of see what I'm talking about with a little bit of information. My hope is to share with you who we are, a little bit about what we do, the reality of sexual violence in our community, in our nation, and globally. And then Carol had also asked that I speak to what do our services look like during this time, during this pandemic, and how are we supporting survivors of sexual violence. So I'm excited to be able to tell you about the amazing work that my team is doing currently to ensure that no balls are dropped, that every survivor is served, and they're doing it all virtually. So it's pretty impressive. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Uh-oh. I am disabled from sharing my screen. So unless Lena gives me permission.
Well, let me see how I do that.
Can you do that for me? Okay. You might be able to go to my individual face and give me individual permission.
Yes, let me go there to find you.
See.
There you are. Okay. Can't rename, mute audio, rename, audio. I'm going to make you host.
Oh, fabulous.
Oh, can't do that. Oh, do you want to change? Yes, I do want to change. Okay, now you're host. So maybe you can share your screen now.
I sure can. Can you all see that? There we go.
Coming up. There we go.
Great. Okay. So a couple of statistics. I always like to make sure people have the facts when we're talking about the issue of sexual violence. I'm also aware that these can be very difficult conversations. You know, I talk about this all the time. So this is something that I'm very comfortable talking about, but I'm aware, especially when I talk about these statistics, that it's very possible that there are people that I'm speaking with who know the issue of sexual violence personally. So I just want to kind of throw that out there to begin with. And I hope that you will take care of yourself. I hope that you'll feel free to ask me any questions. And if you don't feel comfortable asking me a question through this venue, through this Zoom call, my email will be at the end of the slides, and I invite you to reach out to me individually. I'm happy to speak with you offline. So talking about the crisis of sexual violence, in the middle of the crisis of this pandemic, the extent of the problem, folks, is enormous. And I'm sure that you all are not surprised by this, but 6.3 million adult Texans have experienced some form of sexual assault in their lifetime. Whenever I speak about sexual assault, sexual violence, I always want to be clear about the terms that I'm using, because whenever I offer a statistic, they may be using a term that means something very specific, whereas you may think that it means something different. So I am really careful about that. So sexual assault, typically when we talk about sexual assault, that means that we're talking about the broader scope of sexual violence, not necessarily what the Texas Penal Code outlines as sexual assault, which is much more limited, as you can imagine. And I'll spend a little bit more time talking about how we define sexual violence, but I do want to be clear with that here. So 6.3 million adult Texans have experienced some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. That number is staggering. In the last year, 413,000 have experienced it. Sorry, folks, we're going to go back. There we go. And then over 50% of victims report multiple victimization. So I think that's really important for us to recognize, is that survivors of sexual violence are many. There are many, many, many of us in Texas and in the nation. And most survivors of sexual violence have had more than one experience of sexual violence perpetrated against them. So what we always say is we know that sexual violence, it does not discriminate. It can happen to anyone, any gender, any race, any ethnicity, any socioeconomic background. However, we do know, and I will talk more about this, we do know that there are certain individuals and groups that are more vulnerable to sexual violence, certainly. So Dallas Area Rape Crisis Center, who are we? What do we do? We are a nonprofit organization. As I mentioned, we've been around for 10 years. Before 2009, Dallas County, one of the largest major metropolitan areas in the country, did not have a rape crisis response. So if somebody was sexually assaulted in Dallas County in 2007, and they decided that they wanted to report, what would happen is they would end up at Parkland Hospital. They would potentially sit there and wait for a forensic exam to collect the specimens, potential evidence, 12, 15, 24 hours sometimes before they could have a sexual assault exam. Those exams were conducted by the residents who were going through UT Southwestern's medical school and the fellowship and the training programs afterwards, and sometimes the attending physicians, right? So these were folks who, while certainly very, very well trained in their chosen field, were not experts in delivering a forensic exam for sexual assault survivors. And probably, though I'm sure they were very compassionate people, were not the most trauma informed. So we were, as a county, as a community, as a city, we were incredibly far behind the times as far as our response to sexual violence in our community. There was no coordinated response. So there also was no free counseling options available for people. So that's where Darcy came in. Dallas Area Rape Crisis Center was formed by a group of advocates that came together and decided that this was unacceptable in Dallas County, and they created Darcy. And the mission is that we're committed to social change through the implementation of prevention, education, and outreach in the community. Guys, that's not our mission. I just read something on my screen. That is not our mission. Our mission is that we are absolutely committed to providing compassionate care to those impacted by sexual violence. And we're committed to social change through prevention, education, and outreach in the community. I read something different on my screen. And what do we do? So what that means is we have a broad spectrum of services available. Our goal is that anyone who's experienced sexual violence should never have to walk that journey of healing alone if they don't want to. If you've ever been a victim of a crime, certainly if you've ever been a victim of, or you know or you love someone who's been a victim of an interpersonal crime, you know that the follow-up to that, the healing process, the criminal justice process, everything that comes after, it's almost a full-time job to be a victim of a crime. It's a lot. So we want to make sure that we are there to educate the survivors, educate their families, their loved ones on what the process is, what their rights are as a survivor of sexual violence, so that they know what to expect and they can make informed choices for themselves. And then also to support them through the healing process. We run a 24/7 hotline, and we use trained volunteers to run this hotline. So while our organization is less than 25 staff members, we are over 100 strong in our volunteers. And our volunteers are not just, and not to minimize this, but they're not just folks who come up once a year and serve a meal to clients. These are volunteers who have completed 40 hours of intensive training to be able to respond to the hotline and to be able to respond to the hospital so that they can sit with a survivor through that forensic exam if the survivor chooses. In the state of Texas, every survivor of sexual violence has the right to have a trained advocate with them during that forensic exam, which is, we call it a SANE exam, or sexual assault nurse examiner exam. We also provide legal advocacy, crisis intervention and support. You'll see on your screen, counseling services. So this is everything from, you know, a couple of sessions talking with someone, helping them get over maybe that initial sense of overwhelm and confusion and fear, to working with somebody who maybe has very complex trauma. And our counselors may work with them for over a year, maybe up to 2 years. We do not limit the amount of time that survivors are able to receive our services, because we recognize that healing from sexual violence takes time, that every person is different, and that so many individuals come to us with a different collection of variables in their life, right? So someone who maybe experienced a sexual assault in their adulthood, they had a very stable childhood, they have a wonderful support system, they are financially secure, everything else in their life is very stable. They may, I'm not going to promise, but they may be able to recover from a sexual assault more quickly than someone, say, who had a very chaotic childhood, who does not have a support system in place. Perhaps they're homeless, they don't have a safe place to be. You get the idea. So we would never want to come out and say, you can only have 15 sessions or 30 sessions, because we recognize that will not do it for many survivors. And so I'm so grateful to be able to work in an organization and to have the funding to be able to tailor our services to each individual survivor and their needs. We also provide, as I mentioned, support for friends and family members. So we get a lot of phone calls from mothers, from grandmothers, sisters, brothers who call us and they say, hey, you know, this happened to my loved one. You know, this is how they're acting, or this is how they're behaving. You know, I don't know how to love them. I don't know how to support them during this time. I don't want to make it worse. You know, here's what I've said, and that didn't seem to go very well. What do I do? So we recognize the support system for a survivor of sexual violence is vital to their healing process. And very, very often, the initial trauma of the sexual violence is not the only trauma they experience. Oftentimes, they experience follow-up trauma when they report to the police, when they go to the hospital to be treated for any injuries, to receive the exam, you know, perhaps when they tell friends and family, when they tell their employers, you know, the response that they receive from those folks may add to their trauma. If they are not believed, if they are blamed, if they're accused for any part of the sexual violence, or even if somebody responds, you know, being confused about, gosh, well, why are you not acting a certain way? Because surely victims, a real victim would act a certain way. So there's so many ways that we know survivors of sexual violence can experience trauma on top of trauma after the initial sexual violence. So we want to make sure that as an organization, we provide information and support to those family members so they can respond in the most trauma-informed, supportive, loving, healing way. We also are committed, you'll see outreach education within our community. We want our community to be able to respond in the most supportive, loving, appropriate way. And this includes the members of our criminal justice system. So we do a lot of training with police departments in the area, in our county and beyond. We do a lot of training within the DA's office if they're willing to have us in. We will train anyone, anytime, who asks us to come and talk to them about sexual violence and how to respond in a trauma-informed way, so that we can be a part of the overall effort to minimize that trauma for survivors in our community. So the reality of sexual violence, it's kind of a hard thing to accept, but every 73 seconds, another American is sexually assaulted. Yep. So during the course of our time together, there are going to be a significant number of Americans who have experienced sexual violence, who will experience sexual violence. And I will say the most recent statistic tells us that every 9 minutes, one of those Americans who experiences sexual violence is a child. In Texas, our rates are actually much higher than the national average. So in Texas, 2 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime, and 1 in 5 men will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime in Texas. Much higher numbers than nationally. And 1 out of every 6 American women has been the victim of an attempted or completed rape in her lifetime. So again, when we talk about sexual assault, looking at those statistics, that's a broader term. So that may include sexual violence beyond, again, what the Texas Criminal Code, what the Penal Code outlines, which requires a certain type of act in order for it to be counted as criminal sexual violence. Now, things are starting to change, thankfully. We had some change in this most recent legislative session that recognized certain types of sexual violence have a pretty significant impact, and that perpetrators need to be held accountable for that. So there is some change in the law, which we're really, really glad to see, because we know that sexual violence happens on, my screen is frozen. Sorry, folks, hang on one second. Sexual violence occurs on a continuum, and individuals can experience traumatic reactions as a result of sexual violence, any type of sexual violence on this continuum, right? So it may not be what we think of when we think of rape or sexual assault. It could be, sexual harassment. It could be groping. It could be other types of, coercive sexual violence that also can have a seriously traumatic impact. So nationally, 1 in 33 men have experienced an attempted or completed rape in their lifetime. There's a really wonderful resource for men. It's called 1 in 6. And that addresses 1 in 6 young men under the age of 18 might know some type of sexual violence in their lifetime. So again, that's where I want to be really upfront about statistics. Sometimes they can seem a little confusing, and I'm happy to give you any sort of resources to let you know where these statistics came from if you have more questions about that. And then we know that around 63,000 children a year are victims of sexual abuse. And what do we know about sexual violence? We know that the majority of sexual assaults are not the monster who jumps out from behind the bush, or the scary masked man who breaks into your home in the middle of the night. Though those do happen, they absolutely do happen. The majority of perpetrators of sexual violence are people that we know. They are people that we trust. And as you can imagine, that may contribute very often to the community, law enforcement, friends and family members' response to that victim when they come forward with the disclosure of the sexual violence, of maybe not believing them or being confused, right? Because it's not this monster who jumped out from behind a bush with a gun. It's actually Uncle Henry, who we all know and we all love, and nobody can imagine that Uncle Henry would behave in this way, right? After sexual assault in our community, what happens since the founding of Dallas Area Rape Crisis Center, and since Dallas created a SANE program, which is Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner. These are specially trained nurses who provide the forensic exams. And in Dallas, you can receive one now at Parkland, at Methodist Hospital, and at THR Dallas, which is old Presby Dallas. We respond to THR Dallas. That's where we send all of our advocates. What happens after a sexual assault? If somebody wants to report, they are referred to one of those locations, one of those hospitals. However, we know that over 90% of survivors of sexual assault do not report to law enforcement. It is one of the most underreported crimes. And because of that, as you can imagine, it also is one of the most infrequently prosecuted crimes. So perpetrators of sexual violence are and I'm not trying to be sensational or scare any of us, but I think we do need to recognize that because of this, many of them are roaming free. And you'll see here only 3% ever spend a day behind bars. Over 94% of sexual perpetrators are out in the community free to do it again. We also know that those who perpetrate sexual violence don't just do it once. They tend to do it over and over again until they're stopped or they're held accountable in some way. You'll see here I have this little graphic, the top reasons that victims don't report to law enforcement, and you can imagine why they may not report. They were too scared to report. Maybe this perpetrator was someone that they knew. Maybe it's somebody that they loved and they're afraid of what's going to happen to them. Maybe this person threatened them, threatened someone they love. Very often they don't report out of shame. They're concerned that, and rightly so, they're concerned that they're going to be blamed. So perhaps, he went out with his friends, he had a couple of drinks, and, he was sexually assaulted by someone at the club. His concern, and as I said, rightly so, might be that people are asking him, what were you doing out? Why did you drink that much? You know better than to drink that much, right? And then of course the old cliche, but it's very true, and we hear it all the time, why were you wearing that? If you hadn't been wearing that, if you hadn't been behaving in that way, if you hadn't had too much to drink, if you had been more on guard, again, shifting that responsibility and the blame to the victim rather than the perpetrator. So people don't come forward because maybe they're already doing that to themselves, right? They're already feeling a lot of blame and guilt themselves. Maybe they just want to forget about it and move on with their lives. Maybe they think they won't be believed. Maybe their report being prevented from reporting it. Some folks, have real concern about how is this going to impact my employment? How is this going to impact, my reputation within my faith community? How is this going to impact, my daily life from here on out? And we know that it will. And very often it does have a great impact on someone's reputation, on someone's standing in their faith community, perhaps, or someone's employment. So, and that's what we're here to do. We're here to begin to change that, to begin to change the community response. Gosh, I think about you, Carol, and all of the individuals that you all work with at HRI. How many times do we have survivors call our hotline and perhaps they are undocumented, their immigration status is such that they are absolutely not going to call the police. That does not feel like an option that is safe. That does not feel like an option that is smart to them. And I'll be honest with you, we would never encourage someone to do that, considering those circumstances. We don't encourage anyone to call the police anyway, to report. We leave that up to them. We encourage them to do what they think is right, but we make sure they have all of the information so that they can make the most informed choice for themselves. But we absolutely, here in Texas, we hear and we see that a lot, that there are so many survivors of sexual violence who, due to their immigration status, will not report. So there are so many reasons why somebody does not report. I will say 10 years after Darcy was formed, our community has a much stronger coordinated community response. So Darcy is a part of a larger team, and we all come together on a pretty regular basis. We're called a sexual assault response team. And so this includes every single stakeholder who has something to do with the response to a survivor of sexual violence. So maybe it's an advocacy group, maybe it's law enforcement, maybe it's the DA's office, maybe it's the medical professionals, perhaps it's, the labs who test the rape kits. We all come together and we do that on a regular basis. And the reason that we do that is we want to really review how are we doing as a community? How are we responding to survivors of sexual violence? Making sure that our response is coordinated, that there are no gaps, that we're all working together in a unified manner. And as you can imagine, we've been doing that for 10 years, and it's an ongoing process. It requires all of us to come to the table and really be ready to be humble and recognize that we each have a small part in this response, and that what's important and what matters here is the survivor and their experience. Sorry, folks, going the wrong way. So a couple of resources here I really want to encourage you to check out if you have any questions or you're looking for more information. These are the 4 where I got all of the statistics that are in this slideshow presentation. So please feel free. And I'm also happy to share this, my slides. I'm happy to send those over to Carol so that, so that you can have these. So before I talk about how you can make a difference, I want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to check my time, just a few minutes talking about what has it looked like for us during this pandemic, during this time. And I will tell you, like many nonprofits, we have completely shifted. We've completely pivoted all of our services to be virtual. And I was talking with one of our board members today, and for the most part, I will say it has actually gone really, really smoothly, and I'm so incredibly grateful for that. So all of our counseling services, we do those telehealth, essentially. We do that over Zoom. All of our advocacy services we provide over Zoom. So any information, any crisis intervention, we can do a Zoom call with 3 people if they want to or need to reach out to their detective on the case. So whereas usually we would be there in the room with them, or we might be sitting in a waiting area when they went in to speak with their detective, or when they went in to speak with the prosecutor in the DA's office, we can do that now virtually if everybody agrees to that. We are so thankful that none of our services have been interrupted indefinitely as a result of this pandemic. But I will tell you, that was not without a whole lot of scrambling and without our team really, really, really having to work hard to figure out, okay, how do we meet the needs of survivors in our community during this time when none of us can leave our house, when survivors can't leave their house. Also understanding too, many survivors, may be living with their perpetrators, or they may be living with family members who, did not believe them when they disclosed. And so, while I get to live in my lovely home with my sweet family and my great dogs, and I can, come to you with pajama pants on, even though I grown up on the top and pajama pants on the bottom, there are many individuals, as you know, who home is not a safe place for them. So we hope that our services, that maybe that 1 hour a week with their counselor, is a little bit of a light in the dark for them. Now, I will say the most difficult services for us to pivot and provide virtually have been our outreach, the education that we provide in the community, the trainings that we provide. However, our team, our outreach and prevention team, have done amazing work. They've created webinars. If you follow us on Facebook, you'll see there's some Facebook invitations. We have webinar Wednesdays. We have community connections. These are open to the public. You all are welcome to participate in these. So they are really having to reconfigure, how do they think about educating the community now that the community is all virtual. And that has been, gosh, a learning process, I will say. And again, I want to give them a huge shout out. I'm so incredibly proud of the work that they've done. Now, the one service that really we aren't able to provide in the way that we would like is we can't send our advocates into the hospital. So when a survivor reports sexual assault and does want to go to the hospital to receive that exam, that forensic exam, because most of the hospitals have shut down any volunteers coming in, we are not able to do that. So we're providing those services over the phone, but it's not the same. And a survivor they're not always interested in hearing from our advocates over the phone. So that is a gap in our services. But overall, I think our team has done an incredible job. I don't know when we're going to be able to resume our face-to-face services, but we continue to provide the services that we have. We continue to provide those virtually. we actually have seen our counseling numbers increase since the beginning of the shelter-in-place orders back in April. We've seen those numbers significantly increase. And what we're hearing now, as our county is reopening and many of the clients that we work with are returning to work, you know, what we're hearing from them is that they feel very, very anxious about that. They feel very vulnerable and scared to do that. And so we're really grateful that we're able to continue to at least provide the counseling service via Zoom, so that it's not one more thing that they feel creates exposure for them or risk. So for now, and most likely through this summer, we'll continue to provide all of our direct services, all of our face-to-face client services. We'll continue to provide those virtually. And then I have a slide up here for you all. How can you all make a difference? Just, gosh, just inviting me makes such a huge difference. Thank you. Just listening to me makes such a huge difference. I hope that you will share, you know, maybe one thing that I've shared with you. I hope you will take that out and share that with somebody else. The more we can talk about this, the more we can destigmatize this issue, the better our ability to shift community's response to sexual violence survivors, and the more we're able to create a safe environment for survivors of sexual violence and hopefully prevent people from perpetrating. So please talk about the issue. Tell people about us. Let folks know that we're here. All of our services are free of charge. We want to remove every single barrier for an individual who needs our services. So, you know, we will brainstorm with, if they can't get to our office, we'll figure out a way. If, you know, if they don't have time for counseling during the week, we'll figure out a way. We are here to make sure that they have access to the services they deserve. And then also, you know, feel free to give back. Reach out to us about being a volunteer, or as Carol so generously encouraged all of you to do, please be a donor. You know, we can't do what we do without the support of our community, and that includes financial support. So I left this information here for you all. And then finally, here's my email, our web address, our hotline. If you have questions, if you're a survivor yourself, if you have somebody in your life who needs our services, please don't hesitate to reach out. And again, I encourage you, feel free to reach out to me directly.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, there are questions in the chat.
Oh, good, okay. Sorry, guys. Okay, chat.
One's about, do you have problems with clients who don't have access to technology?
Yeah, Carol, I'm glad you asked that question, because I was thinking about HRI, and I know that so many of your clients, that's an issue for them. You know, the majority of our clients are able to, they at least have a smartphone. So that has been, and we specifically chose Zoom because people can use their smartphone to connect with us. So we have not had a huge number of folks who've had a hard time. Also, we are open to providing all of our services over the phone. So as long as somebody has a phone, you know, if they don't have a computer at home, which many individuals do not, we know that, or they don't have, you know, internet access at home, and they don't have a smartphone, we'll just do old-fashioned telephonic counseling. We'll do it the old way. But we have not seen as much of a problem with that as I know in some previous organizations where I've worked, where that was a huge barrier for them.
There's another question, I think, asking you to talk more about sexual assault.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it is mostly men on men. So certainly, you know, many male survivors have been and can be sexually assaulted by a woman. That is possible. That is absolutely possible. But what we know, unfortunately, is that the majority of perpetrators of this type of violence are male. The majority of victims are female. However, many men and boys, women and girls have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime, and unfortunately, it is mostly perpetrated by men. Yes.
More to the, is there anything more that you want to know about that question? The person who asked it, Donald?
since you're now the host, Amy, can you unmute everybody at this point?
Oh, certainly. I sure can.
Should be, if you go to the very top.
I think I can. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. How about that? That's where the confusion was.
Down at, if it shows the participants on the right hand side, you've got mute me, but you should have unmute everybody, maybe. Let's see if I can find it. I don't know if it'll let me do it.
I can mute all.
Okay, can you unmute all?
You know what? I can allow participants to unmute themselves. Strangely, I do not have. Sorry, folks. Yeah, I don't have the unmute all. It's really strange. But I can manually unmute folks. How about
okay. That should do it.
Okay, that works. Yeah, I personally was very amazed at the statistics that you presented. I didn't know that this problem was so wide.
It's incredibly widespread. In fact, whenever I'm out speaking in the community, I'm always so aware that because of the statistics, as I mentioned earlier, most likely there are going to be many survivors in the room. And I always tell people that if they think they don't know someone who's experienced this, they absolutely do know someone who's experienced sexual violence. That person just hasn't disclosed to them. So this is widespread, it's incredibly prevalent, and it has a profound impact, can have a profound impact on those survivors, on their ability to work, on their ability to function in relationships. You know, there's quite a bit of research about the long-term impact of sexual violence. It increases risk of substance abuse, it increases risk of suicidal behavior, it increases other types of risks. It really compounds that, sexual violence does. So what we always talk about is this is not an individual issue. This is not a crime that occurred and it only hurt that one person. This is a crime that it may have targeted that one person, but it has really lasting ripple effects into their family, into their workplace, into the community as a whole. And that sexual violence is not an individual issue, it is a community issue, without a doubt.
Anybody else have any questions?
Any questions?
One posted here, it says, what impact has the COVID-19, well, where to go? COVID-19 crisis had on rapes?
Yeah. You know, Donald, thank you. We have yet to see really the impact. What we know is that reporting is way down. So very few people are reporting sexual assault to the police. Even fewer are showing up at the hospital requesting the forensic exam. Our numbers for those who have reported and who are requesting advocacy are unprecedented how low they are. Now we know, of course, that sexual assault is still occurring because we have folks who are calling us on the hotline and they're saying things like, you know, I would rather risk an untreated sexually transmitted infection. I would rather, you know, not seek out justice or accountability for this perpetrator than go to the hospital and risk exposure to the coronavirus. So we've heard that from more than one person, that it is an active choice and decision that they're making because COVID-19 feels like a greater risk than than the other potential risks they would face. So we know what's happening. We also know for many folks, you know, as I mentioned, it's unsafe in their homes. And so they're at greater risk there because they may not be able to leave or separate from their perpetrator. We also know that people are dating. People are dating during this crisis, right? People are meeting each other. They're meeting each other online. We know that, you know, they're finding each other. I have a suspicion that this is actually a very vulnerable time for many individuals, and that perpetrators recognize that, right? Because people are lonely. People are incredibly lonely. And this would be a time where a perpetrator could really, truly find some folks and could take advantage of the sense of isolation, maybe, you know, mental health instability as a result of the isolation and the anxiety of this crisis. You know, perpetrators, they prey on that. That's what they prey on, are a victim's vulnerabilities. And so I expect that in 6 months, a year, 2 years, we're really going to start to see, and we're going to start to know and be able to measure the impact of this crisis on individuals, on our community. And I think that we'll have a better sense of the numbers further down the road.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have another one. How often does rape cause health damages, tearing, stuff like that, as well as transmission of diseases? I know it causes mental problems and sometimes pregnancy, but what other effects are there?
Yeah, you know, I mean, really, Donald, it's hard to say. It depends. It really depends. I will say that the majority of sexual assaults that occur do not always result in serious injuries, serious physical injuries. And we know that that's because usually the perpetrator does not have to use the threat of violence in order to get what they want. And that goes back to the reality of this maybe being someone that the victim knows, someone that the victim loves, someone that the victim's already afraid of, perhaps, right? So there are many ways that a perpetrator could accomplish sexual assault without, you know, massive physical injuries taking place. So the majority of survivors we see who come to the hospital, there are not a lot of physical injuries, right? The body is incredibly resilient. The body's incredibly resilient. And that can be very, very hard for people. It also can be very hard for friends and family members, or for a jury, or for, you know, the prosecutor, who they really want there to be some sort of super tangible, you know, this could have only happened as a result of sexual violence. And we just don't see that as much as movies and as television would portray that happening. And then you asked, I'm sorry, you asked about other types of impact. Yeah. You said mental impact, but yeah, so certainly, sexually transmitted diseases. And I'm sorry, I don't have the statistics on that. There is some research on that. You know, what we're looking at as far as sexually transmitted infections that are transmitted during sexual violence. And I don't have those statistics offhand. I will say, when somebody reports to the hospital and they receive the forensic exam, that's part of the care that they receive, is they are treated for potential transmission of STIs. And, you know, they even have the option of being treated for potential transmission of HIV if they meet certain criteria that would indicate that they were at high risk of contracting HIV. So that is a piece that's incredibly important. And so that's why we always tell folks when they call us that even if they don't want to report to the police, that is absolutely up to them. Even if they don't want to go have the evidence collected through the forensic exam, we strongly encourage them to reach out to their medical provider to treat any potential sexually transmitted infections, to get tested, and just to make sure that they are healthy and that any injuries can be attended to.
I think there's another question. Jaron, Wallenow, is this, how much of this is domestic violence? I don't know if you want to unmute him, maybe he can. Wallenow? Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was wondering in the
Okay, you're unmuted, or I believe.
Can you hear
Just
me?
speak up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, actually, two questions. One of them is statistical about the domestic violence. How much of it, of the numbers that you've given us, were domestic as opposed to assault in the street or in parks? So, that's, if you can kind of give us a feel for it. Is it like
Sure.
half of that? Is it serious?
Yes. So some of the numbers that are there actually come from a study that looked at, this came out of the University of Texas at Austin, their School of Social Work. It looked at the impact of domestic violence and sexual assault on Texans. And this study came out in 2015. And so you're right, there is some overlap there. In those numbers, it is not include domestic violence or intimate partner violence. So, husband who is abusing the wife who is abusing the wife, that is not included in those statistics. Now, what is included in those statistics is acquaintance sexual violence, right? So it may be, the guy that I sit next to in my, Psychology 101 class every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I know him, or, it might be, it's not stranger versus domestic violence. The majority of sexual violence occurs by acquaintances.
Okay,
Now, when we look at the domestic violence statistics, we know that within those abusive relationships, over 75% of victims of domestic violence, the intimate partner domestic violence, report some type of sexual abuse occurring within those relationships. It's very, very high within abusive relationships.
Yeah, my other question is it's a little bit kind of political in nature. Should a victim of a rape, a woman, become pregnant and she lives in a state where abortion is prohibited or extraordinarily difficult, are there extenuating circumstances that will allow an abortion to occur?
I mean, that I don't know. That depends on the state, right, and their laws. I mean, if you're asking for my personal opinion, I'll tell you.
Yeah, because I personally cannot imagine having a victim be forced to carry to term a baby that she has no clue.
Agreed.
I mean, it's like adding an insult to injury.
Yes. Well, and recently, when this pandemic began and Governor Abbott determined that abortion was a non-essential service, all I can say about that is that we had a number of clients, we had a number of survivors who called our hotline, who disclosed that they were in fact pregnant as a result of rape. And it was an enormous crisis for them. So yeah, as you can imagine, that was a reality for very many women.
Yeah. It was political.
Very much so.
Yeah.
What happened to those women? What happened to those women?
Some of them traveled. Some of them traveled to other states. The ones with resources, typically are able to access that type of service. Now, some of them we don't know because they called our hotline and they may not have ever called our hotline back. And so we don't know what they decided to do or how they decided to handle that. But I do know that some of them who had the resources to do it actually did travel and receive an abortion elsewhere.
Okay, someone's asking whether you receive any government money.
We do. The majority of our funding is government funds. So there is, thankfully, there is quite a bit of funding available for victim services, federal funding available for victim services, and there is some really specific funding that is earmarked for sexual assault services. And, you know, I've been doing this work for a really long time, almost 20 years, and, you know, I really believe that, thankfully, at some point, that was our government's recognition that these are vital services, and these are services that are really, really hard to fundraise for. So, you know, this is not the warm and fuzzy. I'm not the person people want to sit next to at the dinner party. How about that? I'll say that, right? People don't feel better when they talk to me about what I do for a living. So it can make fundraising a little bit difficult. So thankfully, yes, there are federal dollars available. You know, they come with a lot of strings and a lot of restrictions, but we're really, really grateful because they keep our doors open, they keep the lights on during a time like this where, you know, the majority, as Carol mentioned, the majority of nonprofits are experiencing a significant reduction in fundraising efforts because of the crisis. We at least, thankfully, I'm able to pay my staff because of our federal dollars.
Well, that's encouraging.
Yes, I know. I told my team, I was like, look, this is the time where we're grateful that we're federally funded. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Anything else that I can answer?
Hey, all of you all that are on, if you have any requests for future meeting speakers, considering our limitations to being on Zoom, let us know.
Okay, and thank you very much, Amy. We'll post this and encourage other members to listen to it. It's possible some people may have had problems like I did getting on. For some reason, the link didn't work for me, but we'll make it available to people so they can watch it too.
Okay, I have one other announcement. My husband, who you might know is the part of the Dallas County Democratic Party, he wanted me to be sure and let you guys know about the blood drive that's coming up this Tuesday at the Dallas County Democratic Party headquarters. It's at 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock. You call in and you can reserve a spot, and you stay outside until they call you on your phone to tell you to come in. And they, the last time they did this, they had filled up all the spots, but there are spots available at this point for next Tuesday. So you can always go onto the Dallas County Democratic Party website to get that information. Or let's see, you could visit the www.redcrossblood.org and enter the sponsorship code DCDP, as in Dallas County Democratic Party. You can also call 1-800-RED-CROSS and sign up through there.
Nathan Johnson is doing a blood drive also next Friday, the 5th. And it's a little bit farther north for people who don't want to go all the way downtown.
Lena, I know we haven't had any book club meetings in a long time, and I've suggested we do it on Zoom. Is that going to be possible, or are we just not going to do it at all?
Well, it's possible to do it. The one time that I reached out to our book club membership, I only got one person reply that they wanted to do it. But I will reach out again and see if people are willing to do it.
I think one of the problems was people weren't wild about the book we were reading also.
Well, I suggested changing the book. So maybe we can come up with a different book and you know, encourage people to do that. And I think
we're wanting to read a really depressing, heavy book in the middle of the pandemic.
Well, is that when we were reading Anarchy?
yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay. So we'll get a different book, but I think we should continue with the book club. That's what
Oh, I definitely want to continue with the book club, but I think more and more people are having the experience of doing Zoom meetings that they will discover that they're actually kind of fun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Amy, it looks like you're getting lots of thumbs up for your presentation. So thanks a lot. I'm seeing comments like awesome, thank you so much, and things like that. So
My pleasure.
it's available to a larger audience.
Right. Okay, well, I will transcribe the recording, and I'll put it on our Facebook pages, and I'll see if I can get it up on the website as well. So, but I'll put an email out about that when I get around to it tomorrow. So, haven't had dinner yet.
Thank you so much.
Okay. And you, Amy, you being now the host, you may have to stop us all. I can only leave.
Okay. Are we ready?
Yeah, just say end meeting.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
y'all.
Okay, bye-bye.